He was a man of the law, a father, a husband. For over 2 decades he wore the badge with pride, serving his community with unwavering dedication. His neighbors trusted him, his colleagues respected him, and his family adored him. He was the protector, the provider, the man who could do no wrong. But hidden beneath the surface of this perfect life lay a secret. One so devastating, so unimaginable, that it would shatter everything. It began with a single test, a routine paternity test, they said. Harmless, routine, until it wasn't. When the results came back, the truth was impossible to ignore. 5 children, 5 innocent lives caught in a web they never knew existed. And the man they called Dad? Not who they thought he was, but the story didn't end there. Because this wasn't just a case of mistaken identity. It wasn't just one man's lie, the truth ran deeper. A betrayal from within the family, and an outsider, someone no one could have predicted. What happens when the man who was supposed to protect his family becomes the one who destroys it? Officer John Carson was everything you'd expect from a small-town hero. A decorated veteran of the force, he served with integrity and honor. He received commendations for bravery, solved high-profile cases, and mentored young officers. His dedication to justice was admired by all who knew him. To his family, John was more than just a cop. He was a loving husband and a devoted father of 5. The perfect role model. But family life is rarely as simple as it appears. John's younger brother, Mark Carson, was always by his side. They grew up together, inseparable, bonded by blood and trust. Mark was the fun uncle, the one who brought laughter to family gatherings, the one who stayed just a little longer to help with the kids. He was charming, charismatic, and always willing to lend a hand. And then there was David Lynch, an outsider by all accounts, but somehow always present. A family friend, or so they thought. David had known the Carsons for years, close enough to be trusted, but distant enough to remain a mystery. He worked in the shadows, always nearby, but never in the spotlight. To the outside world, the Carson family was unshakable, but beneath the surface, cracks were forming, and those cracks would soon become chasms when a routine medical test would uncover the truth. 5 children, all bearing the Carson name, but none of them John's. Their father wasn't the man they had known their whole lives, but who was he? And how had this deception gone unnoticed for so long? It all began with what seemed like a routine check, a precautionary health test for the oldest son. A minor issue, the doctor assured them, nothing more than an attempt to rule out hereditary concerns. But as the results began to process, something felt off. The numbers didn't match. The genetic markers weren't aligning. And then the unthinkable, the truth that could not be ignored. None of the 5 children shared their father's DNA. It was his wife, Sarah, who first saw the results. Her hands trembled as she read the report. She triple-checked, convinced it was a mistake, but the results were clear. The man she had married, Officer John Carson, was not the biological father of any of their children. 1 DNA test. 5 children. No match. But how? How could this be? Sarah didn't understand. There were no secrets, no betrayals, or so she thought. Desperate for answers, she confronted her husband, hoping for a rational explanation. But John, just as shocked, was at a loss. He insisted on taking his own test, hoping to disprove what science already confirmed. Days passed like years. The second test confirmed the unthinkable. John Carson was not the biological father, but the mystery deepened further. If he wasn't the father, then who was? And why did none of the 5 children share his DNA? Questions flooded their minds, and the family's foundation began to crumble. The results left only 2 possibilities. Either the children belonged to someone outside the family, or they belonged to someone very close, someone far too close. Michael Carson, John's younger brother, the family's closest confidant. Always around, always trusted. But could the unthinkable be true? Could the father of John's children be his own brother. But there was more. A twist even more shocking, because a second DNA test on the youngest child revealed a completely different result. This time the father wasn't John. It wasn't Michael. It was a stranger, an outsider, someone they never even suspected. In one moment, John's world fell apart. 5 children, 1 DNA test, and the discovery of 2 fathers, neither of them John. As the results came in, the room fell silent. The test, which was supposed to provide answers to a simple health question, now delivered something far more unsettling. Each child's DNA, all 5 of them, showed discrepancies. One by one, their bloodlines were pulled apart, and the truth was laid bare. At first, it was impossible to comprehend. The results were not just shocking, they were damning. 2 of the children, John Carson's biological son and daughter, were not his. Their DNA matched none other than his brother, a man who had been part of the family for years, a man whom John trusted implicitly. But the deception didn't end there. The other 3 children, the youngest of the bunch, didn't belong to either John or his brother. Their biological father was a complete stranger, an outsider, a man with no known ties to the Carson family. The report sat there on the table, the paper trembling in John's hand. His mind raced as he scanned the lines of data, hoping, wishing that it was a mistake. But there was no mistake, no misreading of the results, no error in the testing process. John sat back, staring at the test for what seemed like an eternity. His thoughts were a blur, his vision blurred by disbelief. This wasn't possible. The man he had trusted for years, his own flesh and blood, was somehow the father of his children. And the other children, his own flesh and blood, belonged to someone he didn't know. The weight of the truth crashed down on him, a wave of shock and anger flooding his body. But even as John tried to process the impossible, the truth seemed to land with a muted thud on his brother's shoulders. His older brother, the man who had shared so many years of camaraderie and family dinners, stood there, almost too calm. He didn't flinch when John looked up, eyes now wide with rage and disbelief. The 2 locked eyes for a long moment. No words were spoken, but the silence spoke volumes. Had John's brother known all along? Was this some sick, twisted game between them? Or was he just as shocked as John was by the results? His brother's expression was one of quiet resolve. No sign of guilt, no admission of wrongdoing. Just a long, lingering silence that hung in the air between them like a weight too heavy to carry. Across the room, their mother sat in a corner, her face pale, her hands clutching the edges of her chair as though she might fall apart at any moment. Her eyes were fixed on the test results, her lips trembling. She had always known her children to be close, to support each other through thick and thin. But this was unimaginable, a betrayal that tore at the very fabric of their family. Her emotional turmoil was written all over her face. She gasped softly, her breath shallow as she turned away from the paper, unable to process the magnitude of the truth. She had no idea what to say, how to fix this, how to make sense of it. The family she had spent years building, nurturing, was suddenly crumbling around her. There were no answers to the questions she was screaming inside her head, just a deafening silence that engulfed her whole world. This was no longer a question of health. It was a question of trust, loyalty, and deception that ran deeper than anyone could have imagined. The bond between John and his brother, once unbreakable, was now shattered. The children, who had once believed in their father's love, now had to face a truth they were too young to fully understand. And at the heart of it all was an outsider, a man who had never been part of their lives until now. And just as the family grappled with these revelations, the true questions began to emerge. Who was this man? And how had he become part of their story, leaving his mark on their lives in such a destructive way? With the DNA results in hand, it was clear that what had once been a tight-knit family was now unraveling at the seams. The truth had been exposed, but the path to understanding the full scope of the betrayal would take months of investigation and painstaking interviews. The police had no choice but to get involved. What began as a simple health check had now spiraled into a full-blown inquiry into the integrity of Officer John Carson's entire family life. At first, John Carson refused to believe the results. As the test showed his 5 children carried none of his DNA, he sought out multiple second opinions. Denial wrapped itself around him like a thick fog. His trust in the system, one he had dedicated his life to, suddenly questioned. For a man who had once fought for justice, he now found himself in the midst of a personal nightmare. The test could not be wrong, but his mind insisted it was. What he didn't know was that his carefully constructed life was built on layers of lies that would soon begin to surface. John's brother, Michael Carson, the man whose name would soon be tied to this tangled web, seemed just as stunned. But while John struggled with the truth, Michael's reaction was markedly different. Some say he had been harboring guilt, unsure how to confront the years of deceit. Others, close to the family, described him as defensive, attempting to distance himself from the situation as quickly as possible. He became uncooperative, refusing to answer questions when investigators tried to piece together the timeline of events. Then there was the outsider, someone the family had known for years but never suspected could be a part of the equation. The tests revealed that 3 of the children weren't John's, but the biological children of an unknown man. How could they not have noticed? The investigators dug deeper, searching for a link between the children and this mysterious outsider. Interviews with neighbors and longtime family friends painted a picture of a man who had spent considerable time around the Carson family, often showing up at family gatherings and helping with odd jobs at the Carson home. The question on everyone's mind was whether John had known about the affair. Did he suspect something all along, or had he been completely blind to it? And how could the mother, who had been in a relationship with John for over 20 years, have kept such a monumental secret from him? The investigation took a personal toll on everyone involved, and the emotional strain began to seep into the lives of those closest to the family. Some of the family tried to explain away the discrepancies, the lingering doubts and quiet conversations that had always seemed to float just beneath the surface. But with the DNA test confirming the truth, the lies that had been quietly simmering for years finally bubbled up to the surface. For the mother, Lisa Carson, the revelation was nothing short of devastating. The shock of the test results left her emotionally paralyzed. She had never once considered that her children were not John's, and yet now she was forced to confront a reality where everything she thought she knew about her marriage and her family was a lie. As Lisa struggled to process the truth, John found himself facing a different kind of battle, one that questioned not only his relationship with his family, but also his very identity. His role as a police officer, a man of integrity, seemed shattered. He had always believed that his family was the one thing he could control, but now it was unraveling before his eyes. And Michael, his brother, seemed intent on remaining as far from the investigation as possible, despite the fact that his own DNA was directly tied to the fate of these children. As the investigation unfolded, the family's darkest secrets continued to come to light. The police now had more than just a paternity test to go on. They had a web of lies, deceit, and betrayal stretching back years. Each piece of evidence uncovered only deepened the mystery, leaving John and Lisa, as well as Michael, struggling to comprehend how everything they had built could so easily fall apart. John Carson, his brother, or any of their children. But as investigators soon discovered, the truth was far more complicated than anyone could have anticipated. David Montgomery wasn't just a stranger, he was a friend, a confidant, and, for a brief time, someone who had shared intimate moments with the Carson family, even in the presence of the very man who would later discover the truth about his own children. How did a man like David become so closely involved? Investigators discovered that Montgomery had been a fixture in the family's life, first as a colleague of Officer Carson, and later as a trusted friend. But it wasn't just friendship that bonded David to the family. It was something darker, something hidden behind the smiles at family gatherings and the casual conversations over drinks. There had been rumors about David's behavior, whispers about an affair, a quiet tension that no one could fully place. But no one ever questioned David's presence at family events. No one, that is, except for one person, Officer John Carson's brother, Derek. Derek Carson, Officer John's brother, had always been the more rebellious one. While John followed the rules, Derek had lived a life on the edge. Always a bit of a wild card, a man with a history that didn't always match the wholesome image of the family. But what no one knew was that Derek had been harboring his own secret, a secret that might have had more to do with the family's unraveling than anyone ever realized. It was Derek, after all, who had introduced David Montgomery to the Carson family. It was Derek who had vouched for him, vouching for a man who, in the end, would be exposed as the father of 3 of John Carson's children. Derek, interview. I never thought it would go this far. I never thought he would get that close to my brother's family. But there were times I saw things, saw them together. I knew David had his eye on something, but I never knew it would be this. I didn't know he'd crossed that line, but the truth, it was something none of us saw coming. David Montgomery's connection to the Carson family wasn't just a matter of proximity. It wasn't just about friendly barbecues and shared drinks. His presence in their lives spoke to something more insidious. He'd known John Carson's wife, Margaret, for years. But it wasn't until one fateful night that their relationship crossed a line no one could have predicted. It happened one night during a family reunion. Margaret and David, already comfortable with one another after years of friendly conversations, found themselves alone. The air was thick with tension, their conversation growing more intimate as the night stretched on. No one saw the subtle shift in their relationship except for Derek. And though he'd never voiced his suspicions, he'd known something had changed. But even Derek never imagined just how far that change would go. How many years had passed before the truth came to light? How many nights had Margaret kept her secret, hidden behind the walls of a marriage built on trust? David Montgomery had crossed a line no one expected, and the consequences were devastating. But the question remained. Did anyone in the Carson family know about the affair before the test results came in? Or had David's role in their lives been nothing more than a slow, gradual deception that no one could have imagined? The answer to that question would unravel the final piece of the puzzle, one that would change everything for the Carson family and reveal the true nature of the secrets they had kept for years. But even more chilling than the truth itself was the realization that David Montgomery wasn't the only one hiding something. With the truth exposed, the fallout came swiftly and relentlessly. The family, once a symbol of stability, was now fractured, each member dealing with their own emotional wreckage. Divorce papers were filed, the once strong marriage between Officer John Carson and his wife crumbling under the weight of betrayal. Custody disputes over the children, who now grappled with questions of their true parentage, became inevitable. The pain of not just the family but their entire community was tangible. It was as though the walls of a perfect illusion had come crashing down. John, once revered as the town's protector, now found himself not just fighting for his family but for his reputation. Legal battles followed. Could he keep custody of his children? Would he be able to maintain his position in the police force? The community that had once embraced him now viewed him with suspicion and disdain. The whispers on the streets grew louder, the accusations more damning. What happened to the man they thought they knew? At the center of it all, Officer Carson's job, his career, was on the line. The police department, once his sanctuary, now found itself at a crossroads. Should they stand by their officer, or should they sever ties with someone who had betrayed not just his family, but the trust of the community he had sworn to protect? The investigation into his personal life revealed a level of deceit that no one could have expected. Could someone who had concealed the truth of his own children really be trusted to uphold the law? The small town that had once looked up to Officer Carson now felt divided. Some remained in disbelief, refusing to accept the truth. Others, however, felt the sting of his betrayal deeply. For them, the shame was not just about the officer's personal life, it was about the breach of trust in a community built on honor and accountability. While the immediate damage was already done, the long-term consequences had only begun. The family was torn apart, the children left with an overwhelming burden of questions, uncertainties, and emotional scars. The town that once relied on Officer Carson's integrity now found itself grappling with the fallout of this devastating secret. For many, the man they had known was gone, and in his place was a stranger, an embodiment of betrayal. With the truth exposed, the family faced a reckoning. Broken trust, shattered lives, and a community left in shock. The questions remained. Who could be trusted? And would anyone ever recover from the consequences of the lie that had torn their lives apart? In the end, the DNA test revealed far more than just the hidden paternity of 5 children. It exposed the fragility of trust, the thin line between truth and deception, and the unbearable weight of secrets that no one could carry alone. What was once a solid family, held together by love, duty, and expectation, was torn apart by the simple act of truth emerging from beneath years of silence. The bonds of marriage, fatherhood, and loyalty shattered as the revelation hit, leaving behind nothing but the echo of what once seemed so certain. But the real question remains. How could this happen? How did years of lies and betrayal go unnoticed, even by those who should have known the most? And why, after all this time, did the truth take so long to come to light? Was it fear, denial, or something darker, hidden in the shadows of family loyalty and secrets? In a small town, everyone thought they knew the Carson family. But sometimes, appearances can be deceiving. In the end, the truth can destroy everything it touches: family, career, and reputation. It leaves a trail of destruction, and for some, the damage may never be repaired. What would you do if you uncovered such a secret? About your own family or someone you loved? Would you confront it or try to bury it? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story like this one.